It did not begin with fire. There were no cities torn open, no skies lit with weapons, no final broadcasts. When they came, they did so gently, falling through the clouds with ships as silent as moonlight, landing not in capitals or military zones, but in forgotten fields, desert valleys, and mountain passes that hadn't known footsteps in decades. Earth had expected panic, resistance, diplomacy, war. What came instead was silence, and a figure walking through it. The first confirmed contact occurred at 3:27 a.m. in a township without a name, somewhere between the old wind fields of Nevada and the broken ridgeways of Colorado's dead spine. A man named David Merrick was watching the sky from a crumbling porch, drinking lukewarm water from a glass that tasted of iron. His dog had died 3 weeks ago. His radio had stopped working, and the nearest signal tower had collapsed in a sandstorm 4 months prior. He saw the light descend, slow and soft, like a leaf falling from nowhere, and he thought he was dreaming. But then she stepped out of it. Not a suit, not armor, not steel. She was tall, slim, her skin pale in a way that didn't reflect light the way human skin did. Her hair was too white, too uniform, like woven thread. Her eyes, large, faintly silver, set wide apart, met his with neither curiosity nor fear. She didn't speak, didn't raise a hand. She simply stood in the dust of the world, the remnants of 1,000 broken systems swirling around her ankles, and watched him. David stood, blinking, then said the only thing he could think of. "Are you real?" She tilted her head slightly. And then, without moving her lips, he heard it. Yes. The voice did not echo in his ears so much as inside his memory. It was not spoken aloud, and yet it carried tone. Warmth. Something like sorrow buried under many layers of quiet observation. David took a step forward without realizing it, and the dust curled around his boots, disturbed for the first time in hours. The desert night remained still behind him. Only wind, dry as ash, brushed over the wooden slats of his porch. His mind scrambled for a framework, a language, a protocol. Something left over from news stories and military interviews and ancient science fiction tapes played long ago. But none of it fit, because she wasn't trying to negotiate. She wasn't trying to threaten. She was just standing there, as if waiting for the world to notice she had arrived. He asked, "Why here?" Her reply came not in words this time, but in sensation, a visual thread. His porch, his quiet house, the rusted truck covered in sand, the mountains in the distance, loneliness, a map drawn in solitude, and she had followed its shape. She had come not for the planet. She had come for someone alone. That was when he understood, on a level deeper than language, that this was not a fleet. It was not an invasion. She had not been sent. She had come, alone. Her name, as he came to understand it, could not be pronounced with a human tongue. But she allowed him to call her Eli, not because it was her name, but because when he thought of that sound, short, breathy, ending like a question, her skin glowed a little warmer, and something inside the air between them felt lighter. She wore no suit, though the environment did not seem to touch her. The dust settled on his shoulders, in his lungs, in his boots, but it circled her like air avoiding a flame. Over the following days, she remained. She did not eat. She did not sleep, at least not visibly. She walked through the ruins of what used to be civilization with him, silently observing the silence. He took her to the ghost town school, where books still lay scattered in wind-worn classrooms. She picked one up, Botany of the Western Plateau, the cover torn, and held it without opening it. Her fingers moved along its edge, as if feeling its memory. Not its texture, its memory. David asked questions. She did not always answer, but when she did, it was always with a strange kind of compassion, as though she were mourning something she could not explain. They said aliens would come with weapons, he muttered once, kicking a cracked bottle into a ditch, or at least with plans. She looked at him. We do not carry plans, we carry consequence. That was all she said, and in the days that followed, he began to feel something he hadn't allowed himself in years, a desire to stay awake. Not to run, not to survive, just to witness. It happened 2 weeks after her arrival. He woke in the middle of the night, the sky a sheet of dull copper beyond his window. She was sitting outside the house, in the dirt, looking up. Her hands rested on her knees. Her shoulders did not rise or fall, but her skin shimmered more brightly than usual, and when he stepped outside, she turned to him. He didn't ask what she was doing. He only sat beside her, and after several minutes of silence, she reached out, not abruptly, not awkwardly, and placed her hand on his. Her touch was cool, but not dead, and where their skin met, he felt something cross over. Not emotion, not thought, but potential. A joining, a quiet forming of something unnamed. He turned to her, and in her eyes, he did not see stars, or galaxies, or unknown machines. He saw longing, and without understanding why, he leaned toward her. He didn't kiss her, not then, but he let the silence hold them both as the copper sky above flickered with distant, dying satellites. By the 25th day, David could no longer tell where companionship ended and something stranger began. Elay did not speak of her kind, of her origin, or how long she would stay. She only asked questions, always at night, always after long stretches of silence. Questions about sound, about memory, about the way trees once grew in rows along roads that had since disappeared. She seemed fascinated by loss, not as a tragedy, but as a pattern. Like she had seen it before, elsewhere, like she knew it by heart. He built small things for her, a water collector repaired from scrap, a wind chime made from bits of bent rebar and glass. She watched as he hammered the rods into place, her head tilted like a student in awe of a child's drawing. When it rang, soft, irregular tones in the empty wind, she smiled. And it was in that moment, watching her reach out to touch a shard of suspended metal, that David first imagined a future. Not the old kind, with governments and stations and calendars, but a new kind, one made of two people, and something else forming quietly between them. He didn't ask her how she survived. He didn't ask her how long she would live. He only asked, "Why me?" She paused a long time, then said, "Because you still look up at the sky when nothing is left to hope for." He had no answer to that, only the realization that something had begun. Her body changed on the 33rd day. Not violently, not with sickness, but with pulse. There were lights beneath her skin, subdermal currents that shifted when she walked, that brightened when she stood near him. Her steps grew slower, her breathing changed. She began sitting more often, touching her abdomen lightly with a puzzled expression. It wasn't pain. It wasn't fear. It was discovery. David noticed first how her movements grew more careful. Then he saw how she began sleeping. Not lying down, just sitting still, eyes closed, barely moving, for hours at a time. He asked once if she was unwell. She opened her eyes and touched his chest. Something is growing. Not illness, not burden. New. And she looked down at herself, her hands spread lightly over her ribs. It is part of me, but not from me alone. He froze, and she smiled. You are in it. For days, he said nothing. He walked to the edge of the ridge at dusk, watched the old highway vanish into nothing. He counted the stars. Less of them now, hidden by dust, by satellites that had fallen or died. The world had grown small. And now, within that smallness, something impossible was blooming. Not war, not invasion. A child, or more. He returned to her that night with his hands trembling. What will it be? He asked. She didn't reply in words, only reached out and guided his hand to her stomach. There, beneath skin that shimmered like calm ocean, something moved. Alive. Small. Real. He didn't sleep that night. But he lay beside her in the room with no electricity, under rafters where paint peeled like dry paper, and listened to her breathe, and to the slow, rhythmic beat of a heart forming within her that did not belong to either species, but to both. By the 47th day, the changes became undeniable. Elai's body had adapted not only to Earth's gravity, but to something far more invasive: time. Her skin no longer glowed in soft pulses. It shimmered constantly, faint as breath but continuous, like an atmosphere only she could wear. Her motions slowed further, not from weakness, but from focus, as if her body had begun channeling itself inward. Her gaze, once alert to every stray gust of wind or distant creak of the desert, had turned almost meditative. She was listening, not to the world, but to something inside. David built a room for her. He scavenged from ruins of old homes that had collapsed during the dry years. With rotted boards and sand-blasted glass, he formed a shelter beneath the remains of the barn. There was no insulation, no plumbing, but it was quiet, and the wind passed through it like a song too shy to be heard. He didn't tell her what it was for. He didn't need to. The first time she stepped inside, she smiled with her whole face, rare, human, and oddly young. "This is where it will happen," she said. He nodded, even though no part of him understood what it truly was. By the 60th day, Elai no longer left the house. She remained curled in the corner of the room David had built, her body wrapped in thin fabric scavenged from old cargo tarps, her breathing slow and deep. Her belly, round, alien, subtly luminescent beneath the surface, no longer looked like an extension of her form. It looked like a core, as if her entire being had bent around it. Her limbs were thinner. Her spine seemed to curve inward. The bones beneath her skin appeared sharper, not from decay, but from transformation. Her biology was optimizing, shifting for the thing she carried. She no longer communicated through thoughts. She spoke now with words, strained, slow, low in the throat. It was not discomfort. It was deliberate. Every syllable required her to remain in this dimension. This gravity, this heat. It cost her, but she did it for him. "Do you fear it?" she asked one night, her voice barely audible above the hum of old circuitry that still clicked in the barn walls. David sat on the floor near her, his hands dusty from digging a new waste trench behind the shed. He shook his head. "No, I fear what I won't understand." She nodded once. "Then, you won't understand all of it, but some of it will feel like love." He looked down at her belly. The child, or whatever term applied, shifted beneath the skin. A smooth arc rose, then vanished. No kicks, no flailing, just motion, deliberate and soundless, like a thought passing through liquid. "Will it be like you?" he asked. "No, like me." She looked at him, her eyes paler than moonlight. "It will be between, not a blend, a point of contact, a bridge." He sat back, arms crossed, thinking, "And what do we do when it's here?" Her answer came with no pause. "We raise it." The labor began on the 71st day. David woke to sound. Not pain, not crying. A tone. A harmonic hum that seemed to rise from the floor itself, passing through the walls, the beams, the air, until even the dust motes seemed to dance to its rhythm. He ran to the room and found Elai kneeling, her hands pressed to the dirt, her spine arched, her skin glowing with unbearable light. Not a metaphor. Light. Actual radiance pouring from her pores in steady pulses like a heartbeat made visible. She looked up at him, her face soaked with something not sweat, not blood, but silver. Her mouth moved. Now. He didn't ask what to do. He just knelt beside her. She did not scream. Her body unfolded, not torn, not opened, but reshaped, as if her flesh obeyed a geometry he could not comprehend. The room filled with the sound again. The tone rose until David felt it in his own teeth, in his ribs, in the marrow of his bones. And then it ended, not abruptly, but with a breath, and silence, and in the space between that final note and the first sound of the child's breath, David felt the world shift. The child lay in her arms, small, luminous, quiet. Its skin was not pale nor dark, but translucent, like amber held to the sun. Its eyes, closed, flickered beneath their lids with impossible movement. Its fingers curled slowly around the edge of her palm. And it breathed, not through lungs, through presence. He felt it, inside the room, inside himself, like the world had turned inward to listen. The child grew quickly, but not in ways David expected. It did not cry. It did not demand. It simply existed, observing, absorbing, adapting. By the end of the first week, it could sit upright. By the second, it had begun walking in slow, uncertain spirals around the inner wall of the barn, tracing its palms along the splintered wood like it was reading something left behind. Its eyes, iridescent, unfixed, blinked out of sync with time, not fluttering but stuttering slightly, like light skipping on broken glass. They named it Nair. Not because it needed a name, but because David did. Elay had given no suggestion. She claimed names held no function in her culture. They used proximity, resonance, memory. But David, who had spent most of his life alone, needed something to speak aloud in the quiet. And Nair responded to it, not always with a turn of the head or gesture, but with presence, a focus. When he said the name, the child heard it, not with ears, perhaps, but with attention that felt sharpened by recognition. Nair's features shifted, not wildly, not grotesquely, just subtly, over time, like clay being shaped in slow intervals. The skin deepened in hue under sunlight, became more opaque and cold. Their fingers lengthened slightly, and the third joint on each hand became more mobile than David's eyes could track. Their face remained symmetrical, gentle, almost androgynous, but the eyes began to show something new, awareness that bent inward. David spoke to them daily, sometimes for hours. They did not speak back, but they listened, and that was enough. Elay weakened, not visibly at first, but in tone. Her voice grew more infrequent, her responses slower, less nuanced. She moved with stiffness she had never shown before. One evening, as Nair played with wind chimes David had reassembled with bits of copper wiring, Elay leaned against the doorframe and said, almost conversationally, "It is burning through me." David stood still. What is? The pattern, the code that made them. It was not designed to end in me. I was the vessel, and vessels, once poured, begin to break. He stepped closer. Are you dying? She tilted her head, as if to consider the term. I am becoming residual. My form is stable, but my self is separating. He tried not to panic. Can I stop it? No. Her gaze moved past him, toward the field outside where stars were just beginning to blink into view. But you can continue it. That night, she sat beside him on the porch, Nair curled against her side like a sleeping animal. The child no longer needed rest, not truly, but they mimicked Elay's rhythm instinctively, like they wanted to remain close to her as long as possible. David spoke little. He only asked one question. Do you regret it? She looked at him with eyes that were already beginning to lose their reflective shimmer. No, I remember you now, and I remember them. And in the memory I am alive. By the 93rd day, she stopped walking. Her skin lost its light entirely. She slept, if it could be called that, motionless, eyes closed, breath shallow but steady. David built a shaded chamber from cracked solar panels and old concrete blocks. He laid her on cloth and stone, surrounded by small things, a book she once held, a string of beads she had pulled from the sand, a spoon Nair had twisted into a spiral. He didn't want it to be a tomb. He wanted it to be a promise. That she had changed the world, even if the world had not yet noticed. Nair changed after that. Not suddenly, but wholly. They began speaking, not with words, but with layered tones that resonated through metal and air. The walls of the barn rang softly when they moved. The tools David touched felt warm after Nair held them. And when David slept, he dreamed in shapes and colors that weren't his own. One morning, he awoke to find Nair sitting cross-legged outside, surrounded by desert birds. They weren't afraid. They simply sat with the child, unmoving, listening. He watched for nearly an hour before saying anything, and when he finally asked, "What are you doing?" Nair turned, eyes pale and infinite, showing them how not to forget. The world outside did not remain silent forever. David first noticed it in the form of skyglow, barely perceptible to the naked eye, a diffused orange smear on the horizon beyond the dead hills. He hadn't seen artificial light for years. Power grids had long since failed, towers rusted and collapsed, satellites left to drift dark and unmaintained. But this glow was steady. It didn't flicker. It watched. He did not speak of it to Nair at first. They already knew. Days later, the contrail appeared, high, thin, too slow for meteor, too precise for accident. Nair stood at the edge of the barn's broken roof, their hands loose at their sides, head tilted toward the sky like a tree might lean into the wind. David climbed beside them, shielding his eyes. "It's them," he said. Nair nodded. They followed the signal. Again, a nod. "Will they try to take you?" This time, Nair looked at him. The child, no longer a child in shape or in energy, had changed again. Their skin held no color now, just the shade of whatever surrounded them. Their eyes had no visible boundary between iris and pupil. Their voice, when they spoke, came not from their throat, but from the air around David's ears. "They will not understand what I am. And because they do not understand, they will try to classify, to contain." David swallowed. "Can they hurt you?" "No, but they'll try." A long pause. "They'll try to protect themselves. That is the most dangerous form of fear." They came at night. 4 ships, black-bodied and quiet, breaking the still air without heat or sonic bloom. Designed for stealth, designed for approach. The kind built in decades past when Earth still invested in planetary defense and silent conflict. They landed beyond the ridge, just out of sight. But their presence was a wound in the land. Trees curled subtly away from their hulls. Insects fell still. Air tasted of sterilized metal and distant threat. David stood on the porch with a rifle he had not fired in years. It shook in his hands. Nair stepped beside him. "You don't need that. They don't know that." Nair looked toward the hills. "They're not here for war." "Then why the warships?" "Because they're scared." David looked down at them. "Should I be?" Nair turned, their expression unreadable. "Only if you believe that fear is stronger than memory." The soldiers did not enter with weapons drawn, but they wore masks. Full-body suits, insulated and filtered, with helms that turned their heads into blank domes of light. One of them stepped forward, taller, broader, and removed his helmet slowly, like a ritual. His face was weathered, not cruel, but trained. David Merrick. David didn't answer at first. "I'm Commander Reeve, Earth Central Preservation Command. You've been off comms for nearly 6 months." David nodded once. "That's about right." Reeve's eyes flicked past him, to the barn. "We received a signal. It originated from here." "It did. Was that intentional?" David shrugged. "Not by me." Reeve glanced back at his team. "We've picked up unusual biosignatures, movement patterns, atmospheric distortions. Something here is altering electromagnetic behavior within a 10-mile radius." David exhaled. "That'd be Nair." Reeve frowned. "Your child?" "No, the child." Reeve stepped forward. "We need to see them." David didn't move. Nair did. They walked forward out of the barn like a shadow made of stillness. The soldiers didn't raise their weapons, but every hand twitched, every visor recalibrated. Every heartbeat in those suits could be heard by David's ears. Nair stood in the center of them, unarmed, unspeaking. Then said, "You are not ready to understand, but I forgive you." One soldier took a step back. Another swallowed audibly. Reeve narrowed his eyes. "We've come to ensure the safety of this zone. Of Earth. You've introduced something alien." Nair tilted their head. "So did you." For 3 days the soldiers remained. They did not seize. They did not threaten. They built a perimeter, temporary shelters, scanner arrays, uplink towers broadcasting encrypted bursts to satellites that hadn't carried human voices in years. No one left. No one arrived. They were waiting for instruction, or permission, or perhaps an excuse. Nair remained visible. They walked freely through the fields and along the scorched, wind-smoothed concrete that had once been roads. The soldiers tried not to look, but they watched. David could feel it in the way silence hung after every step. Reeve approached only once, trying to speak to Nair with measured tones, asking questions about physiology, intention, capabilities. Nair listened, then answered quietly, "You ask about danger. But the danger was here before I was born." Reeve did not argue. He only watched as Nair reached down, placed a palm flat to the dust, and the surrounding ground lit with soft, geometric glow, like lines being drawn on an invisible map. Not invasion. Communication. A diagram made of memory. That night, Reeve came to David alone. He sat on the porch without invitation, removing his gloves with the slow grace of someone who knew he was unwelcome, but came anyway. His voice was low, tired. "Do you understand what you've done?" David stared at the horizon. "I didn't do anything. I just stayed, long enough for something real to happen." Reeve shook his head slowly. "They're watching. Higher-ups. Not politicians. They're all dust. Scientists. Military councils. Overseers. Whatever's left of the structures that ran things before the last collapse. They're scared. They should be. You're not." David turned, finally looking him in the eyes. "No, I've seen what fear builds. I lived in its ruins. Nair isn't what breaks us. We were already broken." Reeve leaned forward. "Then what is Nair?" David's voice softened. "A mirror, held up to everything we're too tired to face." The next morning, the skies changed. Not clouds, not weather. Something higher. A low hum spread across the valley, vibrating deep in the chest, like thunder waiting for a storm that never came. Birds didn't fly. Insects didn't stir. Even the wind forgot its voice. The soldiers scrambled, equipment flashing with failures they didn't understand. And Nair stepped into the field. Their arms lifted, not to command, not to call, but to offer. To answer. And the sky answered back. Not with a ship. Not with fire. With light. Pure, cascading, spectral light falling from a crack that wasn't a crack at all. Just a fold, a seam, like reality remembering it had been sewn together once, and deciding now was the time to open. Figures descended. Not many. Not ships. Just presence. Forms without edges. Not humanoid. Not monstrous. Vibrations held in space, forming outlines only the mind could process. They came not to extract. They came to witness. Nair turned to David. "This is the part where I go." He opened his mouth, but no words came. Nair stepped forward. "I am not leaving you, but I cannot remain incomplete." David tried to nod, but his body locked in place. Nair touched his hand, and suddenly he understood. Not in detail, but in shape. They were not ascending. They were becoming. Not taken. Unfolded. Nair did not vanish into the light. They merged with it. Not body into beam, not soul into data, but resonance into resonance, like a song finding its root chord after lifetimes spent playing alone. The form that had once walked beside David flickered, rose, widened, and then broke open into patterns that shimmered across the entire basin. The field bloomed with color invisible to most of the human eye, but not to the mind. Everyone, soldier, animal, man, machine, felt it. Not as pain, not as pressure, as presence, a shape of being too large to remain in one body and too kind to retreat into silence. The figures above remained. They did not take. They received. And then they went still, not gone, but waiting, like sentinels at the edge of a new beginning. And when the sky folded itself shut once more, the field remained bright with afterglow. Soft trails of impossible color danced in the breeze that returned slowly, tentatively, like a world remembering how to breathe. And in the center, alone, stood David, his hands empty, his heart so full it hurt. In the days that followed, no orders came. Reeves' team remained another week, collecting nothing, taking no samples. They dismantled the uplinks, packed away their scanners, and left behind only footprints and a single crate of medical supplies David never asked for. Reeves said nothing as he boarded the last carrier, only nodded once. A slow, deep bow of the head, not surrender, not apology. Recognition. And then they were gone. David stayed. Of course he stayed. He rebuilt the barn with better wood, painted it. He planted new seeds in soil that had never held life, and watched green rise like answers. The birds returned. Some of them sang in strange cadences, and when they did, the walls of the house hummed softly in reply. The wind began to shift earlier in the day, as if the valley itself had adopted a new rhythm. And David aged. Not quickly, not harshly. He aged with peace. He did not speak of the lie often, but every morning he passed by her stone beneath the tree that Nair had once sat beneath and pressed 2 fingers to the bark. A sign, of thanks, of memory. Decades later, a child born far from that valley stood in a city rebuilt with the help of silent machines and asked her teacher where stories of the arrival came from. The teacher smiled, took a small chip from her palm, placed it on the table. A hologram shimmered to life. It showed not war, not fire, but a field, a quiet man, and a figure made of stillness and light. The voice from the recording said only this: they came not to take, but to give something we have forgotten how to carry. In the soil of an old earth, something new grew, not alien, not human, but a choice written in living light and remembered forever in silence.